Well, good morning, everybody. Here's my plan for this Friday. We're going to spend a little bit of time looking at recent precipitation patterns and then assess how much has really changed in the upcoming forecast as this larger ridge builds into the eastern part of the United States. We just, again, are going to question how long that's going to last. I want to talk about the new longer range update that just came out about La Niña from the Climate Prediction Center. We're also going to look at the new update from the Colorado State University's forecast for the hurricane season. And we're going to look at their analogs actually as well for U.S. precipitation patterns. And at the end, we'll give you a bit of a global update. So the map I've left you on here is the last 14 days of precipitation as a percent of normal. And again, this always has a 1-day lag in it. So we're not including the storms that were received yesterday. It's important to note that there has been a kind of a drier quadrant that's opened up. I'm thinking about this whole region right in through here, where if you kind of just stay within those bounds, we've seen more areas missing out on recent precipitation than have picked up a lot of rainfall. Thinking a lot about Montana, which has actually picked up a large area now that's back on the drought monitor, and then pockets throughout the Corn Belt getting toward the Mid-Atlantic, over into the Carolinas, Virginia, and down into the northern half of Florida. So while southern Florida has seen record amounts of rainfall just in the last few days, the northern half getting into southern Georgia has been quite dry. So just keep this map, I think, in the back of your heads as we go forward and understand that we did deliver some rain just last night. You're seeing the remnants of those clouds early this morning here from the storms that rolled through yesterday. But if I just take you back to yesterday, deep convection aligned along a very weak boundary, but a boundary nonetheless that stretched all the way from New Mexico into parts of Ontario and Quebec. And the storms on this were sizable, producing some large hail and some very strong winds as they rolled through. We're also watching the end of what's been just an incredibly stormy week in the southern part of Florida here, with some of the deeper convection finally leaving the area, giving us a chance of getting a little bit of drier weather back into that area. But again, a couple other things to take note of. A lot of haze in the atmosphere here as we see the sunset, wildfire in parts of northern Wyoming that we're just going to continue to keep an eye on here. And as we just watch the overall pattern where we think it's going to go, it's going to be about a shifting ridge. We've seen lately, here in the last few weeks, better ridging in the western United States, but we're about to watch a very large one open east, and we're going to get into a discussion about that in a second here. I did want to give you the last 72 hours of total accumulated precip. Let's get an update on this. Here we go. That's through 6 a.m. this morning. Just looking at where the heavier rainfall did come through, and a lot of these storms in through here, producing straight line wind damage yesterday, and also a lot of large hail. But you come down to southern Florida here, and we're off the chart over the last 3 days. My color bar goes up to 10 inches, several places here picking up over a foot of rainfall. And I'm sure you've seen a lot about the flooding that's happened in that area. Storm reports from yesterday. Again, all along that frontal boundary here, a lot of wind reports, over 200 of them, but some very large hail that came through this part of where Iowa and Illinois and Missouri sit, and also as you stretch back into Kansas last night. As you can see, we do have 4 more days of monitoring for severe weather in the near-term forecast. We're going to get to that in a few seconds. But bigger picture things here, soil moisture. It's interesting to note that that same dry corridor we just talked about is beginning to show in the top 40 centimeters or 16 inches. We've got, these drier conditions beginning to show up, which means the atmosphere, of course, is in this regular cycle of evaporation and precipitation. We call that the hydrologic cycle, as you know. And those areas have been drier because we're in summer. We increase those evaporation rates. The higher the temperature, the greater the rate. And so being missed has been critical to kind of some near-term dry areas emerging here, not only on this map, but also in the drought monitor we'll take note of in a few moments. Again, the contrast in Florida is just, it's alarming. This is a huge contrast here, showing you the extent of that tropical moisture, not making it much above or much north of like Orlando, in fact, much farther to the south of there. Also take note, even though there's been some good rain that has gotten through central Kansas, they've seen improvement on the drought monitor. We're still continuing to battle with drought conditions here and then to the south of there in parts of Oklahoma. So let's go from there to the newest drought monitor, released yesterday morning. This is the newest look. Bit of a change. We've added a bit more area to what we would call abnormally dry. That's not technically in a drought category. It's just that this shading right in through here that you see. And we're anxious to see, I think, where this might be going as we progress through the summer months here. So let's take a look at the drought monitor change map. So this is just where in the last week we saw degradation and improvement. Take note that in parts of Kansas, we do have a couple of areas with a 2-class improvement right here in central Kansas. Most of Kansas, though, was under no change. But these areas showing up in this shade here, this 1-class degradation shade, are the areas that we're just going to have to monitor to see if we continue down this path or if we're actually going to be able to bring in some better moisture with time. So I've just been questioning, when we see this big southeast or kind of east coast ridge develop, is it going to fundamentally change where we've been? Right? That is a question I think that's worth asking. So where have we been? Since mid-May, you're looking here at a map of specific humidity. So unlike relative humidity, which is relative to temperature, specific humidity is an absolute measure. So it's how many kilograms of water vapor are in a kilogram of air. So the numbers are small because there's not much water vapor in the atmosphere, even though it's, abundant gas in the atmosphere. It's not, compared to dry air, it's a low concentration. But what I'm looking for here is just those signals of where our driest conditions have been. So we take note of parts of, Western Canada. While I spent this past week from Saskatoon over to Winnipeg, where as you get closer to Winnipeg, there's a lot of moisture in the atmosphere and multiple days of storms here. But this Western Canada dryness is something to be thinking about. Then, of course, while we've watched better moisture moving into parts of eastern Mexico, the dryness that's been here in the low levels of the atmosphere has been just a critical thing to watch kind of move to the north, setting up the western U.S. dry line, the southwestern U.S. dry line. But what I'm looking for is anything to block the access to Gulf moisture, because we've not seen that. And if you just look back again to the 15th of May, the average wind pattern has just kind of done this. Can you see the arrows kind of denoting where that's going to happen? So in terms of building up a resistance to the transport of Gulf moisture in the spring, we've not seen that. That's just not here yet. And building in a larger ridge that comes and sits in this area is not necessarily going to stop that moisture transport out of the tropics. It will temporarily make it very hot in this area, but we're going to keep the atmosphere, I think, juicy. And that's why I continue to stress this idea about, our storms being able to pop, even though the models are going to make it look dry. On the western side of the United States, there's been a very clear ridge that's been in place here. There's another one that's just off the edge of the map there. And the flow over the top of it has been so strong, not only here in the very low levels of the atmosphere, but in the mid and upper levels as well. And interestingly enough, as we look out at this forecast, we're going to be driving another rather deep trough into the northwest, and that is prompted for the 17th, 18th, and 19th of June winter storm watches for the northern Rockies. So again, when we start to think about as we progress, fully into our summer pattern, what has changed, it is going to be something that looks different from this if it is going to show up. All right. And temporarily things move around, of course, but I just want to know, is anything blocking access to the Gulf of Mexico going forward? And is anything going to shut down the momentum flowing across the North Pacific? Those have been big topics we've been covering all week. So I'm going to show you a couple of things here. I was working on this morning. Again, since mid-May, we've not had a strong ridge of high pressure from the Bermuda High making it over to the east. So we know that is going to change. But fundamentally, there's our one high pressure cell. Here's the other one that you just saw. The flow has been very fast south of Alaska into the Gulf of Alaska, and it's rolled itself through like this. And so what this has done is this has just continued to allow Gulf moisture to come on, up into the lower 48. And that's why we've had such strong interaction with thunderstorms. And again, I say all of that recognizing that there have been places that have been missed by this. But if I'm going to be looking for systematic, large-scale drought, I have to be assessing whether or not we've kind of shut down a pattern that continues to bring flow, in other words, remaining unblocked, and then anything that would stop the Gulf transport of moisture if you're east of the Rocky Mountains. All right, so thinking through all of that, I want to show you this. What does the next 15 days look like? So this morning I just wrote some code that goes in and looks at the artificial intelligence model. And I looked at the 500 millibar height anomalies and just kind of added them all up over the next 15 days and, and assessed what the average height anomaly looks like. So I know it's a different projection than what you saw here, but the big thing to take note of is the sizable height increase that's happening in this area. And the ridge that had been a bit farther to the north and sitting here, we're going to watch it kind of slide toward Hawaii. But just take note, there is still flow coming in through this area. And what it's just doing is we're going to bump it farther to the north into Canada with time because of the presence of this ridge. And under this ridge, we're going to get very hot for several days. So thinking all of that through, let's just watch what the jet stream is going to be doing when we kind of, instead of looking at over 15 days in one map, how about 15 days every 6 hours? So I like the AIFS on this, the artificial intelligence. I think it's well aligned with the European ensemble and even a little bit with the GFS ensemble. But what I see in this pattern is, through early next week, we still have that look. But this is a large ridge that's developing in this area, and it's going to, like I said, bring in quite a bit of heat. But again, we are opening this up to moisture transport, and you get close to where that jet stream pattern lives, and we're going to see a lot of probably strong thunderstorms in through here and some very wet weather. So we're not blocking the transport of moisture from the Gulf. So by next Thursday into Friday, as we go through the solstice, I think the big question on a lot of our minds is, does the eastern ridge live? Does it stick around for more than just, a week or so? And as we get out there toward like the 25th, 26th, 27th, I continue to see stronger flow showing up here and coming into the west, but the jet stream's kind of made a northward retreat overall. And it does appear that after about 8 or 9 days of large ridging in the east, which you'll see the temperatures in a few minutes here, we're going to break this down a bit, I think, with a trough of colder air that'll sneak through, which means we will get some relief from that heat. What I'm really curious about, and we're way out there in the forecast here, is do we kind of reposition that large ridge somewhere else? Does it go back to the southern plains? I think these are all important questions that we're going to have to attempt to answer. But bigger picture is this. Over the next 7 days, if you just look at the operational European model run and where it's got the wettest conditions, it's from Montana, getting into the northern plains, getting the upper Midwest, parts of the western Corn Belt. And again, there's a large ridge that's going to develop here, but there will be Gulf moisture transport in between, and the jet stream flow, as you know, is coming in this direction. That's why we get this particular pattern developing. Just take note that as these storms build, there will be storms that also pop inside of the heat here that the ECMWF is not going to capture. It's not designed to do that. And all the while, there is a tropical system that could be pushing its moisture into parts of Mexico and Texas as we go forward. We'll take a closer look at that in a few moments. But what about week 2? Out there, day 8 through 14, this would be June 20th through the 27th, where the jet stream has relocated itself to the north. We still keep an active corridor here with drier conditions in this area. And I just want to stress drier, not dry. I believe that we will be getting large clusters of thunderstorms to roll through this area. That will be something that we kind of nowcast or predict maybe 12 to 24 hours in advance that don't show up in the models. And again, my reasoning for that is that we are still loading this area with low and mid-level moisture, which is critical, I think, to the development of those storms. It's there, it's in the soil, and we don't fully block off the Gulf of Mexico. That's kind of the narrative I wanted to share with you a few minutes ago. Okay, so the temperature pattern as a result of this. Cooler conditions in the Canadian Prairie, Montana, and getting into the northern plains at times. The excessive heat in the west backs off, but it builds here into the eastern part of the United States. This is a 10-day forecast of average temperature anomalies. So we're going to really see some rapid accumulation of heat in this area. The crop in this area is going to take this and grow very, very quickly. You'll see a lot of that showing up here, like I said, over the next 10 days. So where are we? Well, starting here early this morning, this is what our all hazards weather map looks like. And the thing that's really jumping out to me is this. There is winter storm watch. Now, this again is not for this weekend. This is for next week, the 17th through the 19th, I believe is the time frame. But they've really gone out early and put this in the forecast. So let's just take a look at what the European models suggest is when that comes through. So this is the 15th, getting into the 16th, 17th, 18th, right there. So there is chance for the Rocky Mountains to grab some snow. And you know that means there must be a deeper trough of low pressure coming through at this time, which of course we just got a sneak preview up by looking at the forecast of the upper level high pattern. From there, though, we are going to continue to watch the risk of severe storms in the plains today from parts of Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado. There's a frontal boundary that continues to be draped right in through here. So this stretches from Maine back to Pennsylvania, even clipping parts of Maryland and West Virginia and Virginia. Tomorrow, this will be getting into Saturday. We're going to watch parts of Montana, North Dakota. This extends into Saskatchewan and Manitoba as well. And then the risk of storms here in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas too. Once we get into the day on the 16th, we're going to watch the upper Midwest, not only on the 16th, but also on the 17th as well, for the risk of those strong to severe storms in the upper Midwest, as the pattern next week favors very strong jet stream flow through that region. Okay, tropical update. 20% chance on what just went through Florida to continue to develop, but I think a lot of our attention is going to shift away from this and get down here into the Bay of Campeche, where there is a up to 40% chance over the next 7 days of development. They'll probably update this here in about an hour. We'll see if they've improved those chances at all. But you can see that some of the models are really getting quite aggressive on delivering that moisture. So let's just dive into the high-res NAM. I think it was well initialized early this morning on what was going on. As we play through this afternoon and this evening, again, our risk of strong storms here. The frontal boundary draping right through Tennessee, Kentucky, back into Missouri, Arkansas. And we'll watch coming off of the Rocky Mountains, the risk of strong to severe storms here today. So this is 7 o'clock tonight, getting into the overnight hours. And so we could have some locally heavy rain. There is risk for tornadoes and hail out of this as well. But as I play from, let's see here. This is early in the morning on Saturday through midday Saturday. Scattered rain kind of moves to the western Corn Belt. Deeper trough begins to develop in the Pacific Northwest. Watch that low come out here on Saturday night. That's why we're going to keep an eye on this region going into Saturday night and beyond for the risk of those strong storms. It's just another low following the U.S.-Canada border here. So playing this all the way out to Sunday, we can see that surge of tropical moisture that's coming out of the Gulf. You can kind of see the southernmost domain of the high-res NAM. So we're cutting off what's here just with model resolution. But we can see a bit better when we look at the AIFS forecast. So this is the next 7 days, according to European Model Artificial Intelligence. So I see a few different tracks, a very heavy rainfall. But under the large ridge, I think chances of getting meaningful rainfall will be limited. There will be storms, but it's widespread rainfall. Probabilities here are pretty low. Let's see if any of the other models agree. That would be the 7-day AIFS. Here is the 7-day NBM. A little bit different trajectory on what's coming out of the Bay of Campeche. Look at that, or really the Gulf of Mexico here. The NBM is just much wetter along the coast and doesn't see that big surge of moisture coming in farther. But it certainly has the upper Midwest stormy pattern. If we then go over to the WPC, very similar to the NBM, and finally to the European 7-day forecast. And you can see the European model pushing a lot of that in here. So it seems as though the AIFS is the bigger outlier. And that'll be another good test to see how it does. We'll keep an eye out on this for next week. One last model to show you from the ECNWF to the to the GFS. And the GFS and the European have similar patterns, but there are some differences we've got to take note of. For example, over the next 7 days, the European is much wetter here, while the GFS is much wetter coming all the way from Oregon through parts of Montana. While the European brings its wettest conditions in here, note how the GFS is much wetter in two different corridors. And also, take a look at how much wetter the GFS is there too. So these model differences are just key to be watching, and I love this map because it kind of gives me a hint on that. So let's compare them. GFS left, European right. 0Z run, playing through Friday into Saturday. So again, we're watching our complexes of storms rolling through. Here's the deeper trough coming into the northwest on the 15th, 16th, and you can see it. There's some of that snow sneaking down there. And there it is in the European by the 17th. Remember, we're going to watch a corridor run through here too for the strong to severe storms as that moisture comes out of the Gulf of Mexico and Bay of Campeche early next week. So this is Monday, getting into Tuesday of next week. Low curls up here. Again, the differences across Montana, which see the heavier snows here, but the much needed rain. And you compare the models, we can now see why the GFS is so much wetter than the European. But this will be the time period over which a dominant ridge of high pressure sits east. So that flow is largely doing this. This is next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and as we play forward into Friday, next Friday, and Saturday. Again, a lot of activity going on in the tropics. Can I do something for you here real quick, though? I'm going to take you back to the beginning. I want you to just kind of step back from your computer or phone and just watch the whole motion of the atmosphere. And you get a sense of where that eastern ridge really begins to influence the pattern while the jet stream retreats to the north, right along the U.S.-Canada border. So what we can do is we can look at who's going to be on the drier side of things versus the wet. And this is just your next 7 days looking at the probability of staying under a half inch. And if I flip this over to your probability of getting above an inch, this is how things look. So we identify those main corridors there. If we just go ahead and play it out, though, to 10 days, that's our 10-day outlook for the chance of getting an inch. A lot of upper Midwest storminess. A lot of tropical moisture getting right into this corridor. But the jet stream pattern living here. On the drier side of it, though, this is the best chance at staying under a half inch. A lot of this is going to be anchored underneath that larger ridge. But I just want to point out, I still think we get storm clusters rolling through this. Okay, beyond that, once we get out there to day 10, this is a very normal summer progression of the jet stream north. At this point, by day 10, this would be the 24th of June, the models have kind of broken down the large ridge, and there seems to be more ridging that's going to be living here and also in the Caribbean and Gulf than there is going to be sitting over the eastern U.S. when we look at all of the different models. And that's why when we get into the week 2 forecast for precipitation, we generally see storms, right? I mean, you kind of look at the pattern here from the CPC or from the European model or from the GFS, and we just don't see large areas that are expected to be really dry. But that before we get to that, we've got a lot of heat. So I wanted to show you something here. This comes from Iowa State, and it's a map that shows the days since the last excessive heat warning by the National Weather Service office. So there are some places in the Northeast that have gone nearly 1,800 days without having an excessive heat warning. While when you get down here to southern Texas or down into the Southwest, it's been under a week. In some places, we have them today even. So just interesting to note, when the last big heat waves have gone through. I bring all that up because watch what the temperatures are going to do here. Here's Friday's highs, getting into Saturday and Sunday. This is when we spread a lot of 90s and lower 100s into this area, while the deeper trough that's going to set up that snow in the Rocky Mountains digs in on the 16th. Going forward to the 17th, again, a lot of heat here, well into the 90s in much of the Ohio River Valley, Mississippi River Valley, and then into the Great Lakes Basin. Sharp contrast on the backside. That's the front that's going to deliver the risk of severe storms. And as we go from Monday into Tuesday, very hot into parts of the Northeast. Next Wednesday, that's going to be a really hot one here, well into the mid-90s in parts of upstate New York, clear to Maine. And there's next Thursday where it continues. Remember, as you look out over the next 7 days, the number of GDDs that are getting picked up here is approaching kind of a maximum number. We're really pumping in a lot of heat, which means this, especially a corn crop, which is very sensitive to this, is going to be accumulating a lot of heat units and is going to be really, really progressing quickly through its vegetative stages underneath a lot of this heat. We do know that the CPC continues to be warning from the 21st to the 26th about the risk of excessive heat in this area lingering. But again, it's after that time frame, we don't expect it to continue, at least based on current evidence out that far. We can see that in the day 5 through 10 GFS update and versus the day 10 through 15. So it just appears that we're going to be relocating some of this excessive heat once we have finished the end of June. There'll be a bit of a break in it. The European model does agree. This is day 5 through 10 right there. And here we go into day 10 through 15. So the ensemble's kind of backing off on the excessive heat, but still keeping much of the lower 48 with above normal temperatures. I do see Western Canada and British Columbia maybe getting into the Pacific Northwest, going back to a bit cooler pattern. What's important about this, though, is that if we keep colder air lodged here and warmer air lodged there, the jet has to go through it. And that's why I think we just keep this active flow coming across the U.S.-Canada border with time. All right, from there, let's just talk about a couple of bigger picture things. Ocean temperatures. Made a deal about this yesterday, but this is the area that I'm watching most carefully. I think the contrast here to here is what ultimately will continue to drive the jet stream and maybe a more zonal pattern across the the U.S.-Canada border. There's nothing about this right now that's got me overly concerned about major blocking episodes. If La Niña were stronger, or if this water was colder and this water was colder, then I would say, yeah, we're going to start to block this pattern up and it's going to get stuck. But just based off of this, I can't really make that that assertion. Speaking of La Nina, the CPC did update its forecast, and they are now projecting that we have over an 80% chance by the time we get into fall of having La Nina conditions. Again, it's a bit slower in progressing than maybe some of the early season narrative on how quickly we get to La Nina. We crashed out of El Nino quickly, but we're just going to hover, I think, for a lot of our summer in INSO neutral conditions overall. From there, I do want to bring up what the new European weeklies are showing. So over the next 7 days, playing this out there into week 2, that large ridge is going to live there probably to about the 25th, 26th. But the European weeklies, as we talked about yesterday, go back into this kind of very typical summer look. And if you just say, well, what's that mean? Well, that means that the jet stream typically does this. That's a very common jet stream flow in summer. What I want to make a story about here is that if we get some flavor for this, all right, what is it not? It's not split flow in the west. I mean, it's been a long time since I've had to talk about that. It is southwestern U.S. ridging. It is a thunderstorm pattern in this quarter following that 588 line, for example. It's just where the ridge goes. And do the models actually have it right? What I'll be most paying attention to is the spacing of these ISO heights. How tight are they? How much momentum do we keep going in this area? And do we really get a ridge to kind of settle back into where it normally is in June through early July? As if it does, if we do get something like this, we'll tend to get pretty stormy with this pattern. Now, the model doesn't show that. I mean, if you look out there from, let's just play it out. This is the 30-day anomaly. Let's get it out there. There we go. From the 22nd of June to the 22nd of July. You're like, oh my gosh, it's so dry in this area. No, it's not. I mean, this is just, we're just here over a 30-day time period. It's all depending on where the ridge ends up going. Like right now, it's here. Does it slide back over toward the southwest? I don't know. If we keep the momentum going here, what happens to the storms? Do they cascade over the top of it? Do they break that ridge down? That is all possible, but I would just beg you not to look at these maps and just assume that the color shading tells you binary, like dry, wet. I don't think they're going to be able to settle in on this pattern very easily. I do want to show you one more example of this, though, from the 20th of June to the 4th of July, and then out here the 5th of July through the 11th of June. What's the CFSV2 saying? You see, if we keep that momentum up, I see storms coming over the top of this. Tropical moisture coming out as well. Can we kind of see that down here? It does try to keep a lot of dryness in the western plains, but I don't know. I still am not convinced that this pattern is forecastable beyond about 2 weeks right now. Well, we'll go ahead and try. How about this? You see CSU forecast for the tropical cyclone season. They didn't really change anything on their June 11th update. Kind of left it the same. But I was intrigued by Phil's tweet over here. He says, well, with these years we're using, 1878, 26, 98, 05, 10, and 20. I'm only going to pick out 98, 05, 10, and 20 from this because the tool I'm about to use doesn't have data back to the 1926 or 1878. I'm like, all right, if those are the analog years you're using, what did they do? Just as a point of reference. This is what the temperature pattern looked like July to September. It fits the narrative I've had of staying hot overall through this summer. I think very warm overnight lows is going to be a part of this. So temperatures averaging 1 to 2 degrees above average over that long stretch. That's significant. And the precipitation pattern looks something like that. It actually tended to be drier as you worked your way into the northeast. We tended to have a lot of storms that rolled through much of the central U.S., north to south, getting over even to the Ohio Valley. I know you're going, wait a minute, it looks drier. Well, a couple of these years were quite wet in that area, like 2010, very wet in this region. So it's just another point of reference as we kind of wait on the last couple of longer range models. I think the CPC will update their long range forecast today, and we'll, of course, talk about that on Monday. Last thing to get into would just be a quick international update. Next 10 days, not a whole lot of change from the narrative we've had all week with respect to this map. A lot of heat coming into western Russia, parts of Central Europe, western parts of Australia, very hot. Most of South America, very warm over the next 10 days. And some of the excessive heat risk that had been in China starts to abate a little bit. We see it backing off. But the Mayu front is going to be critical for delivering very heavy rainfall throughout China's Yangtze River Valley over the next 10 days or so. Very dry and hot in the Ganges River Valley. Better storms trying to get into Western Australia. This is key for some drought areas here. But what do we have? This area down here in the Russian wheat belt, I see storms north, but the models are just reluctant to really deliver heavy rains into this region. If we can get them into this part of the eastern side of Ukraine, that's been very dry for the last couple of months, so we'll continue to watch that. And very soon, these storms coming off of Africa are going to be a major component of the things we need to be discussing and frankly worrying about going forward. So I'll leave you there. I appreciate you listening this week. I'm back home now. I'll be home all next week, so we'll get back into a regular cadence of this. So again, I want to thank Matt for filling in for me while I was traveling. Hope you all have a good rest of your weekend, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.